So welcome, I'm Ron Broglio, the director of the Humanities Institute, and today we're going to talk a little bit about publishing, particularly university publishing, which is one of the key things that happens within humanities discourse. And so we're happy to have Eric Zinner from New York University Press here with us. And one of the things people don't realize is you can start these conversations about what your book looks like very early on and move from just early pitch of ideas all the way to how do you submit materials, what do those materials look like, and then really after the book is accepted, the various processes that it goes through. I know a lot of junior faculty, when they come up for tenure, might think, well, you know, my book was accepted, it will be out soon. And that's obviously not the case. It has to get in line for a lot of processing as well as getting in the catalog. Conversely, many people are afraid to just talk to a publisher. They're human beings. They like to think about ideas and they like to think with you. The exciting thing, Eric has been in the business for a long time, so they're reading a lot of manuscripts, reading a lot of pitches, so they know the trends in the field. And they can often help you improve your idea by aligning it with what they're seeing with different audiences. And I think that's really crucial, that your idea, it doesn't sit alone, but is in dialogue with others. So with that, I'm going to, let me introduce Eric. He's the Associate Director and Editor-in-Chief of New York University Press. He publishes scholarship in American Studies, Cultural Studies, Literary Criticism, Media Studies, Communication, and American Cultural History. He has a wealth of information over an extensive career in publishing, and we're pleased to have him here in the desert today.
Thank you. Actually, I think I will stand it. I think a little better that way. Probably don't need this, though. Okay. So I don't know where, folks are coming from different points in their career. Usually at these kind of events, it's folks early in their career working most commonly transitioning their dissertation into a book. Sometimes working on their dissertation, sometimes more senior, but I tend to focus on the dissertation to book conversion. There are some things that are specific to the dissertation, but much of it is kind of universal. And then talk a bit about that, about the process, and then take questions. But usually folks have lots of questions about process, and instead of kind of drowning people with how it works, but it's easier just to kind of respond to folks what they want to know, what's really important to them. So just a couple of things about us editors, about what we do and why we do it. We're sort of, you can think of the work that university press editors do as sort of cartographic and topographic. We're mapping fields, and we're mapping the overlap of different fields. NYU has 9 major disciplines that we publish in, but the most important are the ones that run across the list. So the largest fields at the press are gender and sexuality and African American studies that are represented from religion, criminology, sociology to all the humanities that Ron mentioned, and our history list, a legal studies list. So all of this is represented across all of those lists, and it's the cross-disciplinary work that is really kind of the signature of what we do. And Ron and I were talking a bit about last night about which presses do what sort of thing, and the commitment to the humanities, I think, has mostly come from presses sort of our size, and that interdisciplinary work is a hallmark of those presses. So if you think of us, Minnesota, Stanford, Duke, UNC, this is what they call the kind of group 3 university presses of a certain size, and all of them, again, as you'd recognize, quite committed to the humanities, as opposed to our big siblings, Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Princeton. Again, not that they don't do humanities, but their lists are gargantuan, and they have, and they will do things that we will not in science, economics, math, that sort of thing. So, mapping the fields, and also the topography part, looking at fields and trying to figure out what are the sort of interesting nodes, where is work sort of springing up, and making decisions about, does this look like something that's going to kind of hit critical mass, and something we can support, something we can get behind, does it fit with our list, and start publishing in those areas. Editors are good at sort of schematic thinking about narrative arcs, about audiences, and you should think of us, I think, as professional guides. I've had so many authors over the years talk about they didn't really understand how integral their university press editor was going to be to their career, not just to the individual book, but it became this sort of dialogue about their career. And obviously, publishing is such a central part of an academic's career. It makes sense, but folks are still sort of surprised how that works out. So we come in, you all, new scholars emerge out of learning a field. It's literature, it's epistemology, modes of argumentation, engagement, and a PhD marks disciplinary expertise, and the dissertation is the most encompassing demonstration of that expertise. And then you are in a mode of shifting gears of having learned a field, what a field is. You then need to explain how your work is going to be a part of that field, or where that field is going. And this is the point where scholars and editors start to get together. At the point of articulating, having immersed oneself in your field, writing, and now having to kind of convey that work to a larger audiences, and that's where we come in. You'll hear the word, university press editors usually talk in terms of list building. We consider what we do as lists, and that is what we do incrementally over time. And that's, for instance, as opposed to our trade editors at, say, Random House or wherever, where their focus is really book to book. They may have areas of interest, but they'll publish kind of on anything and many fewer books. University press editors are publishing a lot of books over focused areas in disciplines and interdisciplines. University press editors are all great admirers of expertise. Scholars are engaged in genius work. Editors are not. We're there to support your work. And I think there are a lot of benefits to engaging an editor, and certainly engaging an editor early in terms of the importance of testing your ideas, your book concepts with an editor who can help you locate your work in a kind of broader context, and help a lot in imagining audience. This is something that scholars think about a lot in the abstract. I'm writing for my people who do what I do, but editors really are our job is in part to think very specifically about who would be the audience for this book, and how do we get to them, and how we might adjust a book, a proposal, a project to reach a broader audience. I'll talk a bit about the writing itself, and again, in this, I'm talking about the transformation of a dissertation into a book, but again, many of these things are really kind of universal suggestions. So, dissertation is not a book. It serves a different purpose. And I know that the transformation of a dissertation into a book can be kind of difficult, tedious work, but it is that work that a university press wants to see before they'll commit to signing a contract. That is the process that we're engaged in. So I said the PhD marks the disciplinary expertise, and the dissertation, again, is the most encompassing demonstration of that expertise. But university presses publish books, not dissertations. So the scholarly competence that is demonstrated in a dissertation, the thing that you're meant to be doing to showing that you know what you're talking about, it's all assumed in the book. So in other words, whatever the whatever the kind of apparatus in the dissertation is that is devoted to demonstrating your competence goes away, and all the things that demonstrate that you already know what you're talking about, those are the things that we sort of build up over time. So the things, folks don't do literature reviews in the same way anymore, so I know that good mentors have made the process easier transitioning a dissertation into a book, but still there are vestiges of these kinds of things in the dissertation that we work on taking out. Scholars are avid but selfish readers. They will read anything they think will help them with their own work and nothing that they think will not. So our job is to convince as many people as possible that your work is important to and to their own work. So again, the transition, transferring your dissertation to the book, and again, much of this is for all books. This is a couple of these kind of exercises. I know they sound corny, but they work. Over experience, they work. One is, again, particularly with the dissertation, is if you can put it on a shelf for a couple months, 3 months, walk away from it, get as far away mentally from it as you can, pick it up again, and read it pretending it's somebody else's. Again, no, it sounds a little cheesy, but we've had great success with this. Picking up your book and just thinking, what do I want from somebody else's book? Because you're much harder on other people's work than you are on your own. You're much less indulgent when you read somebody else's work than you read your own. Your own work, I've got lots of things to say. I'm going to say all of it. Somebody else's work, you're like, just get me to the point. I don't want to read this and that. So, a kind of sharper mind, a more critical mind, and that, like I said, is I think important part of the process. Don't bury the lead. The dissertations tend to, you spend the book kind of building up to the climax at the end. Books lead with the climax. The introduction to a book should be a provocation. You're not demonstrating, you're claiming. You're making your claims. Then they should be bold and aggressive. You're inviting people in to read the book, but the book is meant to demonstrate what you're claiming in the introduction, not the other way around. Just sort of kind of lead folks along. That said, books also, as opposed to dissertations, all have conclusions. There's something about the word conclusion, I think, that freaks scholars out. So they want to call it an epilogue or a coda or something smaller, but whatever it is, books need conclusions, and those are actually, we can talk a little bit more about those. Conclusions actually should be fun because they don't have the same strictures that the chapters have. Don't bury the lead. You're amplifying your voice. That means cutting down on citations. Often that means cutting down on notes. Fewer sentences that start with, whatever Agamben says, Foucault says, whoever Butler says. We're looking for your voice to be pulled forward. And in fact, when I read dissertations, I can usually tell which chapter was written last, because the development of one's voice over that course is so distinct. And so you're really looking at that last voice, the most mature voice, that you're then pulling back through the entire manuscript. I said cut down on notes. I mean, there's a process where as you're cutting, things will move to the notes. And then there's a second process where the notes become sort of a shadow book, and you go through one more time and cut those out as well. Also, concision, a universal value. Now more than ever, folks' attention spans shorter than ever. Publishers are. It's not that we want short books per se, but I think we're certainly always conscious of a book should do what it needs to do in as few words, as few as pages as possible. I had a friend mention, a friend in trade publishing mention, a mentor had said to them that there isn't a sentence they've written that they can't take 2 words out of. And I looked at my emails, I was like, yeah, that's probably true. It's probably true. Almost anything you write can be kind of honed down. Let's see. So important in any book, but again, especially Well, actually important in any book, dissertation or not. A test of a good chapter is whether it can be read by itself. If it can be read by itself, it is not a chapter. It's an article. Which is to say, chapters really should be, you're, again, building an argument, and each chapter, it's not that you can't sort of drop into a book and get something out of it, but really to do the work of the whole book, one would need to read and read the whole thing through, that you're constructing an argument, proving it over time, and not just these kind of discrete things. I think you've all read books where you're like, these are interesting, but I'm really reading kind of a series of articles that are kind of loosely connected, not very satisfying as a book, could be fine for what it is, but those are really kind of, it happens, that's actually sometimes more of a challenge for senior authors who are writing articles and then want to put a book together, and you're kind of retrofitting a book, and if that work isn't done kind of completely, you get this feeling of, again, something sort of stitched together as opposed to kind of a coherent book. The table of contents. I'm a big fan of the table of contents. It is the scaffolding of the book, the map of the book, the spine of the book, as it were. The chapter as the kind of unit of academic thought, and it gets laid out in the table of contents. It's the first, people pick up a book, they look at the cover, they flip it over, look at the back, see who endorsed it, look at the copy, and the third thing they do is look at the table of contents. That is a crucial place to invite people in, to tell them in brief, to show them in brief what the book's about. It shows in brief, for instance, the narrative arc of a book. Very quickly, when you scan a table of contents, you get a sense of what it's doing, what its interests are, and where it's going and how it's doing it. One of the kind of key things I do with authors is building, making sure that the tables of contents are built around thematics and arguments instead of texts and objects. And so that is, again, one of the things that's common, particularly with dissertations, but common with books in general. It's not uncommon to get a book where, there's a, there's a Poe chapter, there's a Twain chapter, there's a Dickinson chapter, there's a whatever chapter, like that is not, from my perspective, that is not interesting, and you're limiting yourself. So someone opens the table of contents and they see basically, again, series of films or a series of authors or a series of whatever, and it turns on, am I interested in those people or not? That's not what you want. What you want is, here's what I'm doing, here's the work, here's the argument I'm making, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm using to make that argument. And you're really, the invitation is really around the argument. It's really around, the thematics. You can mention, the kind of, the objects of your chapter in the subtitle, maybe. But not to lead with that. And in fact, one of the exercises, another exercise I have folks do that I think is really useful is to force folks to write a table of contents with single word chapter titles. Just to really get down to, like, what is the thing? What is the thing in this chapter that feels most important to convey? You wouldn't necessarily end up there, although some people do. I'm kind of a sucker for the high concept table of contents, but that's it doesn't necessarily need to end it that way. But again, just as a sort of exercise. And I think thinking in terms of the table of contents and thinking of the table of contents as hailing a broad cross section of readers, thinking of that from the early stage, again, really, really helpful. Sort of moving on from that, in the sort of same vein of really trying to capture briefly what your book does, another exercise is to, I have folks write their book in 3 sentences. So the first sentence is the subject thesis, what is it? The second sentence is the intervention, sort of who is going to read this and why, which is sort of focused at the field. And the third sentence is the argument, the sort of so what? What's the point? And that is sort of more outward focused.
Can you say this again?
Sure. The thesis, what is it? Then the intervention, which is who's going to read it and why, which again is kind of focused on the field. And the third is the argument, the so what. What's the point? and that's sort of more outward focused. Again, it's one of those difficult little exercises that can be frustrating and really useful. And again, just forcing you to think in the most core terms, the most basic terms. Similar to the table of contents of with single words, just getting down to the most basic core ideas and then starting to build out from there, instead of having a kind of whole mass of stuff that you then try to kind of hone down. You're building out from there. And again, I think doing that early, as you're transitioning from a dissertation to a book, or from your original, as you're kind of constructing the original ideas of a new book, those thinking that way and those sorts of exercises, which all leads to the proposal, which I won't spend a lot of time talking about. Folks know basically what it is, but I do think the proposal is it is the crucial document from our point of view. I also think it's crucial from an author's point of view. Again, thinking about a dissertation, but also of regular books, the proposal is the aspirational book. So you've written a dissertation, you want to revise it towards a book. The proposal is the articulation of what that eventual book will be. And I think, again, that's another one of these sort of tests. It forces you to think and write schematically. You write the proposal and think, does this cohere? Does this make sense? Does this look like the book I want it to be? That document is the thing that is a moment when it's a great time to talk to an editor. Once you've been able to draft a proposal, I think that is the moment early on when you can talk to an editor and have a productive conversation with them, when you know and can write down what you think the aspirational book is, and then you test that idea with an editor. And they will ask, hopefully, productive questions about what you want, where you're going, why you made certain decisions and not others, what you might add, subtract, that sort of thing. It's a really useful document. It is also follows the book throughout its sort of life within the press. So it is the thing that I will look at first. It is the thing that will go out to readers for peer review. It will go to the editorial committee, and it will stay with the book even later as folks in marketing and publicity and sales and all that look to kind of quick condensed sense of what a book is. So it is a very important document that stays with the book and will be revised as part of the review process. But again, we can talk about that. I'm not surprisingly a big believer in the idea that writing can be clear and compelling without compromising its scholarly integrity. I don't think those should be opposed ideas. A mentor of mine, Bill Germano, published a book called Getting It Published a number of years ago. One of the things he mentions I think is quite useful is to focus on openings. Opening sentences, opening sections, opening paragraphs. You're preparing your reader for what's to come in each moment. Similarly, endings, the transition, the handing off of one chapter to another, of one section to another. These are key moments of kind of guiding and clarifying for a reader what you're doing and why, and allowing them to kind of follow along. In a same sort of vein, a book is not a diary; it's a letter. So its importance is not in what you believe you're saying, but what you're communicating to somebody else. Its only value really is in what you're able to communicate to somebody else. So really, it is something you're sending out into the world, and you want to be as legible to as many people as possible. Writing can be a solitary exercise, and for some folks that's great. Some folks, I think, can feel isolating. I think having things like this, having peers who will look at your book at different stages, writing groups, all of that, super helpful. Because again, you can get kind of lost in your own work and get off track rather easily. I think having people as interlocutors, people who you do the same for, I think can be really helpful. So that's writing. Without getting into necessarily all the details, just to think about what presses are looking for, what a university press is looking for from you. So, in the most simple terms, we're looking for what we call impact scholarship, which is exactly what it sounds like. Scholarship that we believe is going to make an impact on a field, is going to bump a field in a new direction. Each book does not need to be transformational. Each book does not need to start some new thing where we understand that the work of scholarship is incremental, but we do want to understand and know that a project is having a real and, again, impactful conversation with their field. The other thing, one of the things I talked to my editors about from the beginning is that we are interested in the arc of a scholar's career. Again, as opposed to, say, a trade editor who's interested in a book, we're really more interested in the scholarly output of a scholar over the course of their career. It's not just the single book, it's the promise of their work, again, over. It's not to say that you would necessarily need to publish with the same publisher your entire career, but it is something that we are looking at. I have now had many people who have published their second, third, and a couple people even published their fourth book with me. I've been in this a long time. They've been in it a long time. I had folks who published, a book with me, a book with another publisher because it made more sense for them, came back to me for the third. But again, we're looking. I'm interested in seeing the potential of a scholar and their and again the arc of their career, the arc of their scholarship. One of the easiest ways to understand that early on is just looking at a CV. And I always ask for CVs when I ask for proposals. Again, it's one of those core documents. I can read a CV in about 8 seconds and know whether someone is, and what I'm looking for is activity. I'm looking for engagement. And the CV is a great, really quick way of demonstrating that. Publishing, obviously, in all of its different guises, but also conference attendance, conference organizing, whether you're involved in maybe department administration or you're working with the senior scholar, anything that demonstrates one's engagement with the process, with the field, with the work of academe is all good and exciting for me. And the opposite is also true, which is when I see folks who from their CV look rather isolated, not engaged, kind of off doing their own thing, not really showing up. That's it's not a red flag, but it's a yellow flag. And I'm like, well, I'm going to look a little deeper and want to know more about and see more evidence that someone is engaged in their field. So I mentioned what we look for. So impact scholarship works is going to move a field. We look for work that will backlist. Backlist meaning just work that will sell over time. So that's a function of a couple things. One is what we talked about around being as useful to as many scholars as possible. It's also a function of teachability. That's really for us to worry about and think about for publishers. You don't have to pitch your book on whether it's teachable or not unless you're pitching a textbook, which is something we can talk about, or a texty sort of book. But it's something we are always thinking about. Is this book teachable to whom at what level? And similarly, and the third thing we're looking for related is work that's usable and travels. And so the same qualities, can a work get picked up? So we do, for instance, we have a series called American Law in 19th Century. It's 19th century American literature. I have been, and I was really struck by early on starting to see work. I was not a 19th centuryist, I didn't really know the work, but I started seeing interesting work at the American Studies Conference coming out of the 19th century. And I kept seeing it. And so I went to a friend, someone who is a scholar of the 19th century, Priscilla Wald, who's a Duke, and said, is what I'm seeing, real? Is this really compelling work coming out of the 19th century? She said, absolutely. And part of what was compelling to me was the multidisciplinarity, the multiple archives people were using. So part of what struck me was, well, I wonder if historians will be interested in this and will engage this, because what I was seeing was really a form of a kind of cultural history. And that proved to be true, that historians have been, generally speaking, really engaged by it, have reviewed it. A dirty secret is literature is a terrible infrastructure for book reviews. Historians are amazing. They have entire journals just devoted to book reviews. So that's a hobby horse of mine. We can talk about it later. But again, so but recognizing and seeing that work will travel, that will get taken up by related fields. In this case, history, sometimes law, and we're always looking for that where work might intersect with a related field. What else? As I said, the book proposal is a selling tool. It's also a moment to sort of sell yourself. I know that's not, scholars are. It's a sort of modest enterprise. It builds that. This is a moment to not be modest. When you send a proposal, you send a cover letter, cover email, whatever it is, you will help us enormously. And what we're looking for is to help us understand who you are and what the project is very, very quickly. Again, our inboxes are, my inbox at least, is terrifying. And so I'm looking for any help in kind of triangulating quickly who you are, where you came from, what the project is. So the department you came out of, who your mentors are, and also to situate quickly if the book is won a prize of some sort, or anything that will help me quickly get a sense of who you are. And again, name dropping this is the place that's great. Go ahead and drop names. I was sent to you by whoever, so and so suggested I come to you. And again, the book proposal is similarly is itself a selling tool, and as I said, it stays with the book throughout its life within the press. You'll send a sample chapter or two when you send in a proposal, for the obvious reasons, and you pick your strongest work, the work that feels most complete. Journal articles at that stage are a great thing. I love to see those. So if you send a proposal in and you've published an article in a journal that's a piece of a chapter, you go ahead and send that. Love to see. It already tells us that someone's already gone through a vetting process, has been accepted, and has gone through that. It's super rigorous, getting something published in a journal. And then will also be kind of perforce your most polished prose, your most polished work, so that's a fine thing to include. You're the expert on your topic, and so it is up to you to tell us, what's original about your work, why there's a need for it, why you decided to write about it in the first place, and again to be sort of forceful and clear about those things, and then let us then ask questions in return. So I think I'll skip stuff on process, and maybe folks can ask questions about whatever they want. I want to leave time for people to ask. I will just say, especially given the tenor of the moment, I just want to say that we, University Press editors, University Presses, I am a firm and committed believer that academia is where important ideas come from. Ideas matter. The ideas of the academy matter. Now, honestly, more than any time in my life, the work that scholars are doing, I think, is urgent and necessary. It is really a privilege of university presses and university press editors to bring it to the world. So, which is also to say, I want folks to be excited and proud of their work, and also not at all intimidated by the process of publishing. It is like I said, it is really our privilege and honor to be able to do it. And I also remain completely committed to the humanities and the humanistic social sciences, which is really those presses I mentioned before, us and Minnesota, Duke, and UNC, all doing work in those most ardently in those areas. Ultimately, to me, the work of the humanities is the work of interpretation. That is fundamentally what the humanities does. The how and why of new ideas, of what things mean. And again, has there been a time when that's more important? I don't think so. With that, I'll stop and we'll take questions.
Yeah, so I don't know if folks have some questions. you'd like, you can have a seat there, and let's have a conversation. Let's chat a little bit.
Speaking of, I don't know if folks saw there was this Richard Rorty I saw this making the rounds on some people I follow on X about how Rorty had written in a book in '98, Achieving Our Country, wrote this sort of astounding kind of prediction of our moment. And again, struck me as like, here was a philosopher, some of the humanities, really being much, much better, much clearer than any political scientist or sociologist or political theorist about what was happening, what was going to happen, and why. I'll read you a couple of paragraphs just because I think it's kind of amazing, but again, an example of what humanities can do. He said, members of labor unions and unorganized, unskilled workers will sooner or later realize that their government is not even trying to prevent wages from sinking or to prevent jobs from being exported. Around the same time, they will realize that suburban and white-collar workers, themselves desperately afraid of being downsized, are not going to let themselves be taxed or provide social benefits or anyone else. At that point, something will crack. The non-suburban electorate will decide that the system has failed and start looking around for a strong man to vote for. Someone willing to assure them that once he is selected, the smug bureaucrats, the tricky lawyers, the overpaid bond salesmen, and the postmodernist professors will no longer be calling the shots. And then he goes on to say, one thing that's going to happen is the gains made in the past 40 years, again, this is in '98, so pushing back to the civil rights movement, the gains made by black and brown Americans, by the LGBTQ community will be basically wiped out. That, he says, jocular contempt for women will come back into fashion. All the resentment which badly educated Americans feel about having their manners dictated to them by college graduates will find an outlet. So again, there's more, but it's amazing. And again, the clarity of it, understanding. He was making an argument about what he wanted the left to be. He was worried about these divisions within the left and trying to kind of suture things back together, which did not work. But anyway, which is again just to say the power of understanding, of interpretation, of seeing a moment and understanding what's coming.
The power of a backlist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. One thing you did mention that we could just maybe really quickly go through is the process of the book. So let's say you've written an editor, you've talked with editor, et cetera. You've sent some materials, so you've sent your prospectus, this is what the book looks like. And each press has its, if you go online, it has what to send. So a prospectus and then sample chapters. You farm those out, or you've looked at it, maybe said, okay, it's worth farming out. Then you farm that out to some folks. They give you feedback. Then you want to take it from there on how that goes and kind of timelines. And the reason I say timelines is often, especially junior faculty, are very pressed. They have about 6 years towards tenure, and they don't realize that it might take some time from the moment they submit their full manuscript, like the whole thing, to then having it revised, then to get it to press. So.
Yes, a great, a good question, and something we do run into all the time, managing folks' schedules, their time. And it's one of the first questions I ask when I start talking to somebody, where are you at, what year are you on, when does this need to be done, and start working backwards to be able to produce what we need to produce. Because yes, it all does take a fair bit of time. So we get a proposal, the materials. I will just say one thing, which is 90% of what an editor is deciding on in that first instance is fit. Even before we get to kind of, expertise, scholarly quality, the power of an argument, it's really the first decision is just fit. Does this make sense for our list or not? And so if a press says no to you, not a good fit for our list, you should not take it as any commentary on the quality of the work itself. It's simply just that. That is again, that kind of cartographic work that we're doing. It's mapping that for ourselves. So It gets sent out to peer reviewers. Once we've decided, there's also a question of a series. We can talk about that after this, but basically, we send it out. The review process has started, has become, in my experience, slower and slower. Some of this is just a product of, relatively speaking, a smaller and smaller proportion of our peer reviewers have to have published a book themselves, and really almost all have tenure, but certainly have to have a book published. So it's just a smaller proportionate group of people that we're going to. I find particularly in some of our areas, you say in African American studies, you find yourself going to the same 25, 30 people over and over. Folks feel both a responsibility and an enormous burden, and it can be hard just to line folks up. It's such a crucial part of what scholars do, peer review, and they get no professional credit for it, which I think is dumb. Any universities are listening out there, it should be on people's CV. I do this core work for the field. Anyway, so peer reviews, but you can think maybe 3 to 4 months to get feedback, or at least 3 to 4 months once the readers have been found. You get those reports back, and the assumption that they are in the critically supportive to a static range. We will then ask for the scholar to write a response. The response is a very important document because that is the blueprint for your revision. We'll take that and the reports and an ed memo that we put together, a financial statement, the sample materials, and that will circulate to the editorial committee. Go to the committee, make our pitch, and we will come out of that committee with a revise and resubmit, decline, or accept. Most editors will not bring books to committees if they don't think they're going to be accepted. It's not that that can't happen, but usually have a pretty good sense about what's going to fly, what's not going to. At that point, the contract is issued. Probably the most important part of it, honestly, is just the date that you agree to that you're going to deliver the revised full manuscript. So the revised full manuscript comes back in. It goes back out to peer review. I'm talking about our process, but it should be the same for anybody, really, pretty much. We try to get the original 2 reviewers if we can, but we also, if we can't, we're not going to wait. We will go to new people. We're just sure to articulate to the readers what is exactly we're looking for. We are looking for a review of the revisions, not a review of the project all over again. That's the way you get into kind of endless revisions. One person's got an idea, another person's got an idea, and you get kind of pulled all over the place. Again, another, I'd say 3 or 4 months. So you've had, say 3 to 4 to 5 months or something in the initial review. Then you take however much time you decide you're going to take to finish the manuscript. It could be 9 months. It could be a year and a half. I've had historians go for years. I mean, but that is your call, really. And then the process starts again. Again, another 3 to 5 months. Usually at that point, the revisions are specific and fairly minor. They're not always. They're only really substantial if something's gone wrong. If again that blueprint of your revision does not line up with what you actually delivered. But usually the revisions at that point are more focused. So again, it's up to you ultimately how long that takes, but let's say it's 4 to 6 or 8 months. You deliver the final revised manuscript. There's paperwork and stuff that goes along with it. If there's an illustration program, all that stuff gets worked out. We work on it, hand it over to our friends in production, and again, every press has their own schedule, but just figure roughly a year from the time that you hand the manuscript in to the time the finished book comes out.
Yeah, that's the full accepted manuscript in.
The full final accepted manuscript and all the moving parts of it goes into the production process. And again, I just
because then you have copy editing, you've got your indexing,
Proofing.
The final look, proofing, and so you're going through all these different stages, and then you think, oh, okay, it's done, but then you're on their list with a whole bunch of other books. So you're like, well, it's done and it's, the summer, so it'll come out in the fall. And you're like, not really. There's a whole bunch of other books. So really, maybe it's coming out in spring. There's a lot of timing stuff.
There is, and again, we'll talk about that. Just have like as a good early conversation to have. We are always trying to be sensitive to folks, their schedules, what they need. Mm-hmm. That said, I've had folks, drop a manuscript to us just as they're like, 10-year clock is about to go off, and they're panicking, and we want to help, but there's only like so much we can do. So obviously.
Publishers are in a difficult space that they don't necessarily want to be in, which is to be arbiters for someone's tenure. Which is to say, often we know that if you're in the humanities, in order to advance a career, you want a book out within a particular timeline. And the difficulty is the person who decides if a book comes out and when are publishers. And publishers, while invested in someone's careers, interested to see them succeed, also have a lot of other things going on. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes really unfair for universities to farm out that kind of work. But it's an interesting dialogue or relationship.
It is. Yeah. it's a strange, and that's also why I think that doing peer review should be recognized as so important to this process. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Okay. Another thing that I think this particularly helps graduate students and early career scholars, but really for anyone, is how to approach a publisher. So obviously you can email them, and you really gave some great hints of what to include in that email. This is who I am. This is my background. These are people I work with, so name drop. This is what the project's about, and here's the materials. So that's very concise, mm-hmm. Because again, your time's valuable. But oftentimes you can approach an editor at a conference. So, for example, in English Modern Language Association or another conference that you go to. And do you want to talk about that, both setting up an appointment or just dropping into a booth? Mm-hmm. And then how those conversations go? What's it like?
Yeah, so I'm going to be going to the Society for Cinema and Media Studies meeting in Chicago in a couple weeks, and I'm in the process of putting my calendar schedule together. It's a mix of I'm reaching out to some people who authors of mine already, or somebody who was recommended to me, or somebody looking at the program and seeing who looks interesting to me and want to know about, and people reaching out to me to say, hey, I have a project, I'd love a few minutes to talk about it. Can we set something up? So some of those folks, it's just a kind of blind thing where I've not met them before, but that's fine, that's great. I would try not to do it like the day before the conference starts, give people a few weeks. But again, leading up to those conferences, great time to reach out to editors. Again, if you have a connection, if so-and-so sent me your way, say that. Sometimes the senior scholar will make that connection. Hey, they write the email, hey, I'd love for you to meet so-and-so. And again, it's a fine thing to ask your mentors to do. This is also where sometimes series come in. They're book series. The series editors are kind of an intermediate place between us and a scholar. So often those conversations can happen at conferences as well. And it's in a way maybe easier to approach a book series editor, or easier to approach them at an earlier stage when the thing feels still sort of unformed, and talk to them as more as a kind of mentor than having to have a kind of fully baked book. So we'll have those meetings, usually half hour at a time. You'll see editors running in and out of the booth to meet people and go sit down, and that's basically all I do now. I used to go to panels. I don't do that anymore. It's just all meetings all the time. And those can be, they're really helpful to me, and I think can be super helpful to scholars to, again, a first attempt at testing out that book idea and seeing what the reaction is.
Right, and those conversations can be, they're fairly open. I mean, again, you're doing some of the stuff that you had already mentioned. This is who I am. These are the people I work with. This is what the project is about. And then it allows them a bit of time to describe the project, in terms of not just abstract ideas, but here are the scenes, here are the moments, here are the kind of things I'm interested in intervening in, or the tensions. So it's giving like a little bit of detail that allows the editor to riff on it,
Right.
and develop out and kind of poke it or push it around a little bit to get a bigger sense of it. And it's useful in that way because if you think about it, if you're an editor and you just get an email out of the blue, here's a book. And you're like, well, who are you, and what's the context of this thing? This is the abstractness of email. That having already met you can be helpful, right?
Yeah. It's helpful, yeah. It's helpful. I mean, the conversation itself hopefully was very helpful. But also once you've met someone, it's for the obvious human reasons, it's just, you're building a relationship, and it's easier to go from there. I would, generally speaking, not recommend just sort of going into a booth unannounced and trying to catch editor's attention. You can try it, but usually it's just kind of awkward, and I'm usually running from one thing to another. I can't really focus, and you'll feel like like I'm not listening because I'm kind of not, because I'm moving on to something. It's just not a great, if it can be a nice moment if again a senior. A mentor brings you by and says, hey, I want you to meet so-and-so, maybe you can make some time, even if not at the meeting. You can follow up by email, something like that. So again, those all the basics of networking, yes, do all of that.
The other thing that I think you touched on is why this press, and is it a fit? And it seems like I remember there was a point in my career where you start looking at the books that are published very differently. And as you start picking up books in a series, and you're like, well, what are they saying? Or you start paying attention to what are the series, what are the books you're interested in, what series are they in? Who's publishing them? Who's the series editor? And there's a whole bunch of information in these books that can help contextualize the book you want to have land.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. So, and again, the old bromide, which is true, is you can figure out who you should be submitting to by looking on your own bookshelf, and basically the books from the presses you've been buying and studying with are the presses most likely. That's broadly true, but books have also they may be 20 years old, they may be 10 years old. I mean, so going to a booth at a conference gives you a really nice sense of the press's most current front list. The stuff that they're invested in right then that's coming out. And even more so, the book series. Again, those are longer term commitments for a press. So they are telling you that we are, we have a series called Sexual Cultures. It's the oldest one I've worked on, 25 years now, and I don't know how many books, 50 plus books in it. So again, a long term commitment, but we also have some new series. So what's a new series? We have a series called Minoritarian Aesthetics, for instance, that just started about a year ago. So again, here's a way of saying, well, clearly the press is making, again, a longer-term commitment in this area. So a great way of knowing, as a leading indicator as opposed to a trailing indicator, as the social scientists say, what's coming, and again, what are the long-term commitments from a press. So.
Right, and when you know who the series editors are, they might be at a conference you're at, and you can hit them up and so forth.
Yep.
Then one of the other things is, always like to ask, what are common mistakes you see for authors either approaching a press or writing, etc.?
I mean, the most obvious things are, I get, proposals about things that have nothing to do with that aren't a fit, and that's annoying, frankly. If someone's not going to even take like a couple minutes to look online to see, we don't do French literature, we don't do whatever. So that's the easiest, quickest no there is. I mean, you want the most obvious stuff. It's not really, but we'll get people will send out, understandably, kind of mass, they're surveying a bunch of editors, but I get an email addressed to somebody else. Again, it's fine, but I mean, just sort of the obvious things. I think people can overpromise. You don't need to. I get it's a fine line, but let me say this. One of the things that I think is a common kind of misperception is audience. So I think scholars will write and say, here are the this could be of interest to this group, this field, all this list, and they imagine that the audience they're articulating is the agglomeration of all of those people. And what an editor thinks is your audience is the place where all of those areas overlap. That's the audience. There's no point in just kind of naming. It's not a cumulative thing. If this person, that person. So I think just naming clearly who you think is the kind of core audience, and letting us kind of that's something we know and can if we want to know more suss out. So I don't think you have to overpromise about that.
What about submitting full like once you get to the stage of submitting full manuscript, doing that to one press at a time versus multiple presses?
Just transparency, just making sure everybody knows that that's what you're doing. It's a fine thing in your cover letter to say, I'm sending this to you, and select other presses. I think it's again it's a fine thing to do. At the proposal stage, you should talk to everybody and anybody. I think it's a great thing to kind of sound out as many people as possible. The rubber hits the road when the press says, "Hey, we'd like to send this out for review." Then you'll have to have the conversation about whether if another press is also interested in doing that, and then you just have to say, I'm interested in another press, do you accept simultaneous submission or not? And you'll have that conversation. It's less common now that we do that. It used to be much more common. Now, just for reasons of time and money, basically, that it's less common. But it will still happen. It just, again, transparency is the key. This is who I'm working with. This is who I'm working with. Here's the timeline. You commit to kind of seeing the process through with both presses. I say both because any more than another press, and I'm not interested. It's just too much work to say I've got, and it also suggests you're not being that selective. People say, well, I have 3 or 4 presses I'm going to send this out to, and I'm not going to do that. Other presses might, but so just thinking of that.
And I think just being honest, like there's no harm, no foul there. Just like let people know. That way you're not burning anyone on that. And because you either say yes or no, or and then they can make a decision of the directions they want to move in.
Absolutely. The press editors are not shy. We all get it. We all know each other. It's not a big deal.
Well, that's the other thing is you know each other. So sometimes if it's not a fit for your press, it's your press adjacent.
Right.
Which presses it might fit, and can sometimes say, well, if they say this is not a fit for our press, you can say, are there adjacent presses that might be of interest?
Definitely.
And they can recommend because you know each other really well. Let's see. In terms of just other matters, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's particularly pressing. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience. We did a series earlier on trade presses and agents. So I would say if you're interested in trade, we have that online, which is a very different thing from university presses. So how to approach an agent, how to get involved in trade presses. And recently, Larry Casuto was here with talking about his book, Academic Writing as If Readers Matter. And that video is also on our YouTube. And I would also recommend your picking up his book because it fits much like you were saying. The focus is not on yourself, it's on your readers. That is, when you're writing, you're thinking stylistically about reaching an audience. Right. So I would highly recommend you shift from the academic being caught within oneself improving an idea or defending an idea into conveying and teaching that idea to others.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any questions that I can answer? Please.
Want me to use the microphone? Yeah. We have a number of people watching online. Do you want to start with one of them? Are there questions from online? No. Okay. Yeah, thanks. I've published a couple of books with university presses, and the first of those was obviously kind of the related to the dissertation, kind of typical first academic book.
Right.
A later one was categorized by a press as a textbook, so it was sort of fell into a different kind of publishing trajectory or something. Mm-hmm. But and as I'm thinking about proposing a couple of new projects, in light of that experience, I've always, regardless of kind of how the book is almost categorized, I've always struggled with the section on proposals that's more or less asking about marketing and promotion, mm-hmm. and thinking about sort of what's compelling from an editorial point of view to put in that section for something like a first book or something that might be more like a textbook or a popular, kind of outside the academy looking book. Are there kind of features that are either unwitting stumbling blocks or that are especially compelling for those different kinds of books that you might be assessing?
If you're pitching a textbook or a teaching text, I mean, broadly understood, that certainly, if you can point to classes that you know of that would teach this, so we'll sometimes get a list of here's a sample of, and actually just name them. Here's at Arizona 201, et cetera, et cetera. That's great. I mean, that's super helpful. Again, doing an editor's work for them to demonstrate this is not just a kind of idea. This is taught. This is taught in these places, and this is a book that could lend itself to those exact classes. So that's that for sure. Marketing for certainly for a first book or a first scholarly book, I don't think you have to say a lot. Look, if you have a platform of any sort, then of course, for sure, say that. I'm active on whatever platforms and do that. I speak regularly if you have something specific to say. But you don't need to. There's nothing. You don't have to kind of overpromise on that. I think again, context. It's not marketing exactly, but a few sentences about where your book is landing in a field is helpful. So it's related to or following in the kind of wake of this book and that book. It's arguing against this book and that book. That kind of work is very helpful for, again, a kind of triangulation. Here's where this is. Here's who I'm talking to and against. And then I guess if you're looking, you didn't mention it, but if you're looking for a trade book, more general audience book, then that becomes a little bit more important. Again, the platform, a very overused term, but it is what presses, particularly trade presses, are going to be looking for. Who do you already have, and what audience do you already have built in? But again, that's more for trade books.
Hi, thank you for sharing all the information. One thing I'm wondering is whether you place all the books that you accept within the series, or do you have like individual titles that come out? Like in general, it seems like most presses are beginning to do that, where they curate series and there's like less loose titles. Is that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Early in my career, I did not very much work with series, and now I find series a very significant part of my list. And it goes both ways. I use series to also place books. So traditionally, all the series bring books sort of to the press, to the series, but a lot of the books in our series, different series, but books that I have spoken to somebody and say, hey, I think this might be a good fit. Reach out to the series editors. What do you think? So it works both ways. That said, I'm agnostic. I don't, a book can be in a series or not in a series. That doesn't really make a difference to me. I would just say that I think your observation that more books than are based on series that used to be.
I partially asked that because of this, figuring out how to navigate whether to approach the acquisitions editor or whether to approach series editors. Because for my project, I was approached by an acquisitions editor. Then I actually found out at a conference that the series that he was telling me about, the editors were not aware of it. So it was kind of uncomfortable, as if I was having a separate conversation, and I wasn't sure about the logistics, like what is the right thing to do in terms of navigate. Like if you see a series that your work might fit well with, is it a good idea to just directly email the series editors, or should one still go through the acquisitions editor?
You can do both. We actually often on the series page on the website, or we have these postcards, but it says what to do, and you can usually either or both reach out to the series editors, reach out to the acquisitions editor, or both. For me, it's pretty free flowing. If what's not uncommon, again, in the first paragraph of that cover note, is I'm thinking about my book potentially in X series or X and Y series, and throw that out. Again, another great way of quickly contextualizing how you see your work within the list of a press. Then I'll have that in mind and think about, whether that seems like a good fit, and if so, reach out to someone. But it should be. In that instance, I think it was just, I don't know, a little communication breakdown. It shouldn't be a thing one way or the other. Whether you start with, the acquisitions editor or the book series themselves. I think I guess if you have a very strong sense of this is really where I want it in this book series, then I would start with the book series editors. If that seems fairly clear to you, and especially again if you know, or someone knows one of those series editors, is a great way to start to talk about your book.
So I do have one last short question, which is there are a lot of presses that are now moving toward, because of the long, because it takes a long time to publish something. So you might have an idea in 2025, and it will come out in 2028 or 2029. There are now some things like Minnesota has a Forerunner series, and a lot of these presses have. They're short, 25,000, 30,000 word pieces, and they have a quicker turnaround time. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of work that's out there?
Yeah, we've been experimenting with form more. We have had a series called Avidly Reads, similar idea, 30,000 word, really essays, essentially, long essays. They're experiments in they're writing experiments. They're experiments, at least for us, they're, for those books, for instance, they really had no footnotes. They were through written, if you think of the old, like, New York Review books, long form essay, this is what this is about. Got an approachable voice, a more a distinct topic. What can I say about them? There have been successes and failures. I don't know, or I can't say it's been like a revolution. I think lots of presses have tried. I don't think it's been like this is now the thing. Part of the issue is they don't serve the professional function that the other books do. So scholars, junior scholars are not going to write, or probably not going to want to write this thing. It's really for senior scholars only, and then so it's not as built into the kind of life cycle of academe in the same way. So it's a kind of an extra thing. But yeah, there are a lot of experiments that we talked about at dinner last night. I think scholars have so many more opportunities to write now, even if it's just online posts. But you have folks write and for non-academic audiences now write, quote unquote, all the time, and have much more sort of a live sort of feedback about what that means, what people respond to, what they don't, and folks are incorporating that into their work already, which is great. Which is great. I just think the writerly exercise now, in its weird contradictory way, is actually people are writing a lot more in a different way, and they're bringing that to their scholarship, which generally is for the better.
That's great.
Yeah.
So let's just leave it there, and thank you very much for coming out to
pleasure.
the desert
Absolutely.
and helping us
Absolutely.
out.
My pleasure.